She didn't just lose her home. She was erased from her own life. No money, no identity, no place to go. And the man who promised to protect her was the one who took everything. But what she did next? No one expected a woman to disappear into an abandoned subway tunnel and come back stronger than ever. It didn't happen all at once. That's the strange part about betrayal. It rarely arrives like a storm. It seeps in quietly, almost politely, until one day you realize the ground beneath you is already gone. Alina used to think her life was simple, stable, even predictable in a comforting way. The kind of life where mornings felt warm and safe, where the future didn't feel like a question mark. Daniel was a big part of that certainty. He wasn't perfect, but he knew how to say the right things at the right time. He knew how to make her feel secure, how to make her believe that no matter what happened outside, inside their little world, everything would be okay. At least that's what she thought. In the beginning, there were no obvious signs. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just small changes, subtle shifts that were easy to ignore. Daniel started coming home later than usual, brushing it off with casual explanations. Work pressure, deadlines, meetings that just couldn't be avoided. Alina wanted to believe him, so she did. That's what trust looks like sometimes. It fills in the gaps even when something doesn't quite add up. She would smile, nod, and go back to whatever she was doing, telling herself she was overthinking. But then came the silence. Not the peaceful kind they once shared, but a heavier silence. Conversations grew shorter. His answers became quicker, less detailed. Eye contact started disappearing. It was like talking to someone who was already halfway out the door, even when he was standing right in front of her. She noticed it, of course she did. You can't live with someone and not feel the shift. But every time she tried to bring it up, he had a way of deflecting it. "You're just tired," he would say. "Don't overthink things. It's nothing, Alina, really." And somehow those words worked. Not because they were convincing, but because she wanted them to be true. There were moments when doubt crept in stronger than usual. Like the night she noticed him sitting alone in the dark, staring at his phone, his face tense in a way she had never seen before. When she asked what was wrong, he locked the screen too quickly and forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Or the morning she found a stack of papers on the table, documents he quickly gathered before she could read them, saying they were just work stuff. Little things. Always little things. But together, they started forming a pattern she couldn't fully understand. Still, she stayed. Because love has a way of making people patient. It teaches you to wait, to trust, to give the benefit of the doubt even when your instincts are quietly warning you. Alina wasn't naive. She just believed in what they had built together. She believed that whatever was happening, they would face it as a team. That's what marriage meant to her, not perfection, but partnership. What she didn't know was that the partnership had already ended. Daniel wasn't just pulling away emotionally. He was preparing, quietly, carefully, without leaving a trace. While she was holding onto memories and trying to fix something she couldn't see, he was dismantling everything behind the scenes. Every late night wasn't just work. Every distraction wasn't just stress. It was calculation. Every day, he was taking small steps toward an exit she didn't even know existed. The accounts they shared started to change. At first, it was subtle, small withdrawals that didn't seem alarming. Then larger amounts explained away with quick excuses. Investments, temporary transfers, things she didn't fully question because she trusted him to manage those details. He handled the finances more often, and she never saw that as a problem. It felt like division of responsibility, not control. Until it was too late. Even the apartment, the place she thought was theirs, wasn't as secure as she believed. Papers had been signed, agreements made, changes processed, all without her fully understanding what they meant. Her name, once tied to that space, was quietly removed. Not overnight, not in a way that would raise alarms, but gradually, strategically. Like someone erasing a name from a page, one letter at a time. And through all of this, Daniel stayed calm, normal even. That was the most unsettling part when she looked back later. There were no explosive arguments, no dramatic breakdowns. He didn't act like someone about to leave. He acted like someone who had already decided. The final days felt almost ordinary. They ate dinner together. They spoke about small things. He even smiled a little more than usual, which, at the time, felt like a relief. She thought maybe things were getting better. She thought maybe whatever distance had come between them was finally fading. But what she didn't realize was that this was his way of closing the chapter, not with conflict but with quiet, not with honesty but with absence. The morning he left, there was no warning. Alina woke up expecting another normal day, the kind where you stretch slowly, glance at the clock, and think about what needs to be done. But something felt off almost immediately. The air was different, too still, too empty. "Daniel," she called out, her voice echoing slightly in the apartment. No answer. At first she assumed he had stepped out early, maybe for work, maybe for something urgent. But as she got out of bed and walked through the apartment, that uneasy feeling grew stronger. The silence wasn't temporary, it was complete. She opened the closet. His clothes were gone. Not a few things, not the usual items someone might take for a day or two. Everything. Shirts, jackets, shoes. The empty space looked unnatural, like something had been ripped out. Her heartbeat quickened. "Daniel," she called again, louder this time. Still nothing. She rushed to the living room. The shelves looked different. The drawers felt lighter. She checked the small box where she kept her jewelry, empty. The envelope where important documents were stored, missing. That's when the panic hit. Not slowly, not gently, but all at once. She grabbed her phone and tried calling him. Once, twice, again, straight to voicemail every time. Her hands started shaking as she opened her banking app, her breath catching in her throat as the numbers loaded. 0. Not low, not reduced. 0. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. Her mind raced, trying to piece together something, anything, that could explain what was happening. A mistake, a misunderstanding, some kind of error. But deep down, a quiet, terrifying realization was forming. This wasn't an accident. It was planned. She stood in the middle of the apartment, turning slowly as if something might suddenly reappear if she looked hard enough. The walls felt unfamiliar now. Cold, empty, like they no longer belonged to her. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice breaking in a way she couldn't control. But the silence that followed was different now. It wasn't just quiet. It was final at first. It didn't feel real. Alina kept moving, almost automatically, as if her body hadn't yet caught up with what her mind was trying to process. She picked up her phone again, dialed Daniel's number, and held it to her ear like it might somehow change the outcome this time. Voicemail. Again, she didn't leave a message. What could she even say? That she didn't understand, that she needed answers. The words felt too small for what had just happened. She walked back into the bedroom, staring at the empty closet like it might explain something if she looked long enough. Her chest felt tight, like there wasn't enough air in the room. She sat down on the edge of the bed, hands trembling slightly in her lap, trying to think clearly. There had to be a way to fix this. There had to be someone she could call. Her first instinct was to reach out to friends. She scrolled through her contacts, hesitating before tapping a name. It felt strange, suddenly needing help in a way she never had before. When the call connected, she forced her voice to sound steady. "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" But even as she spoke, she could hear the distance on the other end. Concern, yes, but also hesitation. People have their own lives, their own problems. Her situation sounded complicated, heavy, something that didn't have an easy solution. The conversation ended with vague reassurance. "I'm sure it'll work out. Maybe try sorting things out with him first." Sorting things out, as if that was still an option. She tried again with someone else, and then another. Each call felt harder than the last, not because people didn't care, but because no one really knew how to help. Some offered sympathy. Others offered advice that didn't quite fit. A few didn't answer at all. Slowly, the list of options started to shrink. By the afternoon, reality began to settle in. This wasn't something that would be fixed by a conversation. This wasn't temporary. She checked the apartment again more carefully this time, opened every drawer, looked under the bed, searched through every corner like she might find something Daniel had missed, some clue, some resource, something that could give her a starting point. But there was nothing, just empty spaces where things used to be. Even the documents that proved who she was, gone. That's when a different kind of fear started to take hold. Not just the fear of being alone, but the fear of not having anything to stand on. No money, no proof, no safety net. It felt like she had been erased piece by piece until there was nothing left to hold on to. As evening approached, the light in the apartment began to fade. Shadows stretched across the walls, making the emptiness feel even more pronounced. Alina sat on the floor now, her back against the wall, knees pulled close to her chest. She hadn't eaten all day. She hadn't even thought about it. Her mind kept replaying everything. Every conversation. Every moment she might have missed something. Every time she chose to trust instead of question. It wasn't just about what Daniel had taken. It was about the realization that the life she believed in had never been as secure as she thought. At some point, there was a knock on the door. Sharp, unexpected. She froze. For a brief moment, hope flickered. Maybe it was him. Maybe he had come back. Maybe there was an explanation, something that could undo all of this. She stood up quickly and walked toward the door, her heart pounding. But when she opened it, the person standing there was Daniel. It was the landlord. His expression was firm, almost impatient. "Alina, we need to talk." Her stomach dropped. The conversation that followed felt like it was happening underwater. Words reached her, but they didn't fully register at first. Legal terms, agreements, notices. The details were complicated, but the message was simple. She wasn't allowed to stay. Her name was no longer on the lease. There had been changes, documents signed, everything processed legally. I didn't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The landlord sighed, not unkindly, but not with sympathy either. "I understand this is difficult, but there's nothing I can do. You'll need to vacate." Vacate. The word echoed in her mind, long after the door closed. She stood there for a while, staring at the spot where he had been, as if the conversation might somehow reverse itself. But it didn't. Nothing did. The apartment, once her home, no longer felt like hers. It felt temporary now, like she was already a stranger inside it. Every object, every corner, every memory was suddenly fragile, like it could disappear at any moment. That night she didn't sleep. She lay on the bare mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside. Cars passed. People laughed somewhere in the distance. Life continued, completely unaware of the collapse happening in her world. Her thoughts shifted from confusion to something heavier. What now? The question had no clear answer. By morning, the urgency was undeniable. She gathered what little she had left, some clothes, a few personal items that hadn't been taken, things that felt insignificant compared to what was lost. She moved slowly, not because she had time, but because every movement felt heavier than it should. When she finally stepped outside, the air felt different. Colder. Unfamiliar. The door closed behind her with a quiet finality that she couldn't ignore. For a moment, she just stood there. No plan, no destination, just a bag in her hand and a life that no longer had direction. The city didn't stop for her. People walked past, focused on their own routines. Conversations blended into background noise. Cars moved in steady lines. Everything felt normal except for her. She started walking. Not because she knew where to go, but because standing still felt worse. Hours passed without her noticing. The streets changed. Buildings shifted from familiar to unfamiliar. The noise of the city grew louder, then quieter again as she moved further away from places she recognized. At some point, the weight of exhaustion caught up with her. She found a spot on a sidewalk, near a wall that offered a small sense of shelter, and sat down. Her body felt drained, her mind even more so. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold onto some kind of stability. People passed by, some glancing briefly, most not looking at all. She wasn't invisible, but she felt like she was. The reality of her situation settled in slowly, but completely. There was no quick solution, no immediate help, no clear path forward. Just uncertainty. Just silence. Just the quiet, heavy understanding that she was completely on her own now, sitting on that cold pavement, watching a world that kept moving forward while she struggled to take even a single step out of the place where everything had fallen apart. The night air carried a different kind of silence when you had nowhere to go. It wasn't peaceful. It pressed against you, reminding you that the world had space for everyone, just not always for you. Alina sat on the edge of the pavement, her back against a cold wall, watching the streetlights flicker to life one by one. People passed without slowing down. Conversations drifted by and disappeared. The city kept moving like it always did, steady and indifferent. She didn't know how long she had been sitting there. Time had started to lose its shape. Minutes stretched into something heavier, harder to measure. Her body ached, not just from exhaustion, but from the quiet weight of everything that had collapsed in such a short time. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself, though it didn't do much against the creeping cold. "I just need a place for tonight," she whispered under her breath, as if saying it out loud might make it real. But every option her mind reached for seemed to disappear just as quickly. Hotels needed money. Shelters needed identification. Friends needed explanations she didn't have the strength to repeat anymore. Every path felt blocked, like the world had quietly closed its doors one after another. That's when she noticed the staircase. It wasn't obvious at first. Half hidden behind a broken railing, surrounded by overgrown weeds and rusted metal, it looked like something the city had forgotten long ago. A faded warning sign hung crookedly at the entrance, barely readable under layers of dirt and time. "Subway closed, unsafe." She stared at it from across the street, her eyes lingering longer than they should have. There was something about it, not inviting, not safe, but different, separate from everything else. It didn't belong to the busy world around her. It existed outside of it. For a moment, she looked away. This wasn't a solution. It couldn't be. But then she looked back again. Because right now, she didn't need perfect. She didn't need safe in the way people usually meant it. She needed somewhere that didn't ask questions, somewhere that didn't require proof, somewhere that didn't expect her to explain who she was or how she ended up here. Her feet moved before her thoughts fully caught up. She crossed the street slowly, each step carrying a mix of hesitation and quiet desperation. Up close, the staircase looked even more abandoned. The metal railings were rough to the touch, cold and slightly damp. The air near the entrance felt heavier, like it carried a different kind of stillness. She paused at the top. This was the moment where she could turn back, walk away, try again somewhere else. But where? The question lingered for only a second. Then she took the first step down. The sound echoed softly, a hollow metallic note that disappeared into the darkness below. She hesitated, glancing behind her one last time. The street above looked distant already, brighter, louder, filled with movement that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. She took another step. And another. With each one, the noise of the city faded. The air grew cooler, thicker. The faint smell of dust and old concrete filled her senses. It wasn't pleasant, but it was quiet. Strangely, almost comforting in its emptiness. At the bottom, she stopped. The tunnel stretched out in front of her, long and shadowed, disappearing into darkness. The walls were worn, marked by time and neglect. Broken tiles, scattered debris, old signs hanging at odd angles. It felt like stepping into a place that had been left behind years ago and never touched again. "Hello," she called out, her voice soft but uncertain. The sound traveled farther than she expected, bouncing off the walls before fading into silence. No response. Just emptiness. She stood still for a moment, listening carefully. No footsteps, no voices, nothing but the faint hum of distant air moving through the tunnel. It wasn't completely silent, but it was close enough. Her grip tightened on the small bag she carried. "No one's here," she whispered to herself, more to calm her own nerves than to state a fact. She took a few cautious steps forward. The ground beneath her feet felt uneven in places, small pieces of debris shifting slightly as she moved. Every sound felt amplified, every movement more noticeable. Her senses were alert, her body tense, as if expecting something to suddenly appear out of the darkness. But nothing did. The deeper she walked, the more the outside world seemed to disappear. The faint glow from the staircase entrance faded behind her, replaced by shadows that stretched along the walls. It should have felt terrifying. And in a way it did. But there was something else too. Relief. No one was watching her here. No one was passing by with quick glances or quiet judgments. No one was asking questions she couldn't answer. For the first time since everything fell apart, she wasn't surrounded by a world that expected something from her. She stopped after a while, finding a spot near the side of the tunnel where the wall curved slightly inward. It wasn't much, just a small area that felt marginally more sheltered than the open space around it. She set her bag down carefully, her movements slow, deliberate. "This is just for tonight," she said softly. The words felt important, temporary, manageable. She leaned against the wall and slid down until she was sitting, her knees drawn close to her chest. The cold of the concrete seeped through her clothes, but she didn't move. Her body was too tired to search for comfort. For a while she just sat there listening. The tunnel had its own kind of sound. Faint echoes, distant drips of water, the occasional whisper of air moving through unseen openings. It wasn't alive, but it wasn't completely still either. It felt separate. Her breathing slowly steadied. The fear that had followed her all day didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It became quieter, less sharp. Not gone, just manageable. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small object, a lighter she had almost forgotten she had. She stared at it for a moment before flicking it on. A small flame appeared, flickering gently in the darkness. The light was weak, barely reaching beyond her hands, but it made a difference. It pushed back the shadows just enough to remind her that she wasn't completely swallowed by them. She looked around her small space again, seeing it more clearly now. The rough texture of the wall, the uneven ground, the scattered pieces of what used to be something else long ago. It wasn't a home. It wasn't even safe, not in the way people understood safety. But it was something. Something that didn't belong to anyone else. Something that hadn't been taken from her. Her grip tightened slightly around the lighter as the flame flickered. "I'll figure this out," she whispered, her voice quiet but steadier than before. The words didn't carry certainty, but they carried something else. A beginning. She leaned her head back against the cold wall, her eyes slowly adjusting to the dim light, her body finally allowing itself to rest, surrounded by the forgotten stillness of a place the world had abandoned. A place no one expected anyone to survive in. A place that, for reasons she didn't fully understand yet, felt like the first step toward something she couldn't see clearly but could feel starting to form somewhere deep inside her, fragile and uncertain, but real enough to make her stay instead of climb back up those stairs into a world that had already turned its back on her. The first few days blurred together in a way that felt almost unreal. Alina didn't think in terms of plans or long-term survival yet. Everything was reduced to something simpler, something more immediate. Stay warm. Stay hidden. Get through the night. Those were the only thoughts that mattered at the beginning. She would wake up disoriented, sometimes unsure where she was for a few seconds, until the cold concrete beneath her and the dim, echoing silence of the tunnel brought her back to reality. Sleep came in fragments. Light, restless, never deep enough to feel like rest. Every small sound pulled her back to awareness. The distant drip of water, the faint shift of debris somewhere far off, the subtle movement of air that made the shadows seem alive. At first, fear stayed close, sitting quietly beside her like something waiting for the right moment to take over. But slowly, something else started to grow alongside it. Awareness. She began noticing details she hadn't seen before. The way certain parts of the tunnel felt less cold than others. The small pockets where the wind didn't reach as strongly. The areas where the ground was slightly smoother, more stable. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make small decisions. And those small decisions started to matter. "This corner is better," she whispered one morning, shifting her things just a little closer to a curved section of the wall. At first, her things were barely anything. A bag, a jacket, a few items she had managed to keep, but even those felt important now. She arranged them carefully, as if placing them with intention could create some kind of order in a place that had none. By the end of the first week, survival no longer felt like a question. She was still here, and that realization changed something inside her. The fear didn't disappear, but it stopped controlling every movement. In its place, a quiet determination began to take shape. If she could make it through one night, she could make it through another. And if she could do that, maybe she could do more than just endure. The thought came slowly. What if this didn't have to be temporary? She didn't say it out loud at first. It felt too bold, too uncertain. But the idea stayed, lingering in the back of her mind as she moved through each day. The first real change happened almost by accident. She found a piece of wood near the entrance one afternoon. It looked like it had broken off from something long ago, worn down but still solid enough to hold weight. She dragged it back to her spot, the sound echoing louder than she liked. Every movement still carried risk. Every noise felt like it might draw attention, even though she hadn't seen anyone else since the day she arrived. "What can I even do with this?" she murmured, turning the piece in her hands. At first, it was just something to sit on, a way to keep herself slightly off the cold ground. But as she adjusted it, leaning it against the wall, something clicked. It didn't have to stay the way it was. She could change it. That single thought opened something. The next day, she went back toward the upper parts of the tunnel, moving more carefully now, more aware of her surroundings. There were things scattered everywhere if you looked closely enough. Broken pieces of old benches, metal rods, wires, things that had been discarded, forgotten, left to decay. To anyone else, it would have looked like trash. To her, it started to look like possibility. She didn't take everything at once. That would have been impossible. Instead, she carried small pieces back each time. One board, a bent piece of metal, a scrap of fabric. Each trip felt like a risk, but also like progress. Back in her corner, she started experimenting. At first, it was messy, awkward. Nothing fit together properly. Pieces slipped, collapsed, refused to stay in place. Her hands grew sore quickly, her fingers rough from handling materials that weren't meant to be reused. There were moments when frustration hit hard enough to make her stop completely. "This is pointless," she said once, pushing a piece of wood away after it fell for the third time. The sound echoed louder than she expected. She froze, listening. Nothing. Just silence again. She let out a slow breath and looked at the scattered pieces around her. No, it wasn't pointless. She just didn't know how yet. That realization changed the way she approached everything. She slowed down, watched more closely. paid attention to how things balanced, how weight shifted, how certain pieces could support others if placed correctly. It wasn't something she had learned before. It was something she was figuring out in real time, through trial and error, through patience she didn't know she had. Hours turned into days. And slowly, something started to take shape. The first structure wasn't impressive. A simple arrangement of boards leaning against each other, forming a partial barrier between her and the open tunnel. It didn't fully block the space, but it created a sense of separation, a small boundary that felt important. She sat inside it that night, pulling her jacket tighter around herself, and looked at what she had made. "It's something," she said quietly. And for the first time since she arrived, the space felt different. Not just a place she was surviving in. A place she was shaping. That feeling grew stronger with each small improvement. She found ways to secure the boards better, using bits of wire to hold them in place. She layered pieces of fabric over gaps to reduce the cold. She cleared the ground beneath her, moving debris aside to create a more stable surface. Each change was small on its own, but together they transformed the space. Days blended into weeks. Her routine became clearer. Morning meant checking what she needed, what could be improved. Afternoon meant searching, carefully and quietly, for anything useful. Evening meant returning, adjusting, building, reinforcing. She started talking to herself more often, not out of loneliness, but out of focus. "This needs to go here. No, that won't hold. Try again." Her voice filled the space in a way that felt grounding. Her hands changed too. The softness they once had was replaced by something stronger. Small cuts and bruises appeared, then healed, then were replaced by new ones. But she stopped noticing them as much. They became part of the process, part of what it took to keep going. One evening, after adjusting the structure for what felt like the 100th time, she stepped back slightly and looked at it. It wasn't perfect, but it was stable. It stood on its own. She walked inside, ducking slightly under the uneven edge, and sat down. The difference was undeniable. The space felt enclosed now, protected in a way that went beyond physical structure. It created a boundary between her and everything outside, a quiet separation from the world that had pushed her here. She lit the small flame again, holding it up carefully. The light reflected differently now, catching on the surfaces she had built, creating shadows that felt softer, less overwhelming. For a moment, she just sat there, taking it in. All of it. Every piece, every effort, every small decision that led to this. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders relaxed. And something she hadn't felt in a long time surfaced quietly. Pride. Not loud, not overwhelming. Just steady. "I did this," she whispered. The words felt real in a way nothing else had for a long time. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was creating. And in that creation, something inside her had shifted completely, something that no longer depended on what had been taken from her or what had been lost, something that existed entirely because she chose to keep going, to keep building, to keep turning a place meant to be forgotten into something that carried her presence in every piece, every mark, every carefully placed structure, something that didn't need permission to exist. Something that couldn't be erased as easily as everything else had been, because this time, it wasn't built on trust or promises or anything that could disappear overnight. It was built on her own strength, her own persistence, her own quiet refusal to let the emptiness around her define what her life would become from this point. Forward time had changed the way Alina heard the world. In the beginning, every sound meant danger. Every echo felt like a warning. But months had passed, and the tunnel had become something else to her, not just a hiding place, but a space she understood. She knew the difference between distant vibrations from the city above and something closer. She knew how air moved through the broken passages, how small sounds traveled along the walls. So when she heard the footsteps that night, she knew immediately. This wasn't normal. They were too steady, too deliberate. Not the random noise of the tunnel, not the shifting of debris. Someone was down here. Alina froze, her body going completely still. The small flame she had lit moments ago flickered gently, casting soft shadows against the walls she had built with her own hands. For a split second, she just stared at it, her mind racing. Then instinct took over. She reached forward and blew it out. Darkness swallowed everything. The footsteps grew louder. Each step echoed through the tunnel, bouncing off the concrete in a way that made it impossible to tell exactly how far away the person was. Alina's heart pounded so hard she was sure it would give her away. She pressed herself closer to the wall, barely breathing. "Hello," a voice called out. Male. Unfamiliar, and yet something about it tugged at her memory. She didn't move. The voice came again, sharper this time. "I know someone's here." Her hands tightened into fists. Fear crept back in, not the distant, manageable kind she had learned to live with, but the sharp, immediate kind that made everything feel fragile again. If they found her, it could all disappear. Everything she had built. Everything she had become. The footsteps came closer. A faint beam of light cut through the darkness, a flashlight moving slowly across the tunnel walls. It passed over broken tiles, scattered debris, inching closer to her hidden space. Alina closed her eyes for a brief second. "Stay still. Stay quiet." The light reached the edge of her structure. Paused, then moved across it. "Wait," the voice said softly. Something changed in the tone. Not suspicion. Recognition. "Galina." Her breath caught. No. It couldn't be. Slowly, almost against her own instincts, she opened her eyes. The flashlight beam shifted again, this time more focused, more searching. And in that thin slice of light, she saw the outline of a face she knew too well. "Daniel," she whispered. The name felt heavy, like it didn't belong in this place. He stepped closer, lowering the flashlight slightly as if trying to confirm what he was seeing. I can't believe it," he said, his voice unsteady. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence between them was different from before. It wasn't empty. It was filled with everything that had happened, everything that hadn't been said. Then his eyes shifted, taking in the space around her. The walls. The structure. The small details that showed time, effort, survival. "You built all this?" he asked, almost in disbelief. Alina didn't answer right away. She watched him carefully. He looked different. Not just physically, though that was clear too, his clothes worn, his posture less confident, his face carrying a kind of exhaustion she had never seen before. But it was something deeper than that. The certainty he once had was gone. "What are you doing here?" she asked finally, her voice calm in a way that surprised even her. Daniel hesitated. "I've been looking for you," he said. A short, almost quiet laugh escaped her. "Looking for me?" she repeated. The words didn't sound angry. They sounded distant. He stepped closer, as if trying to close the space between them. "I know how this looks," he said quickly. "I know I messed up." "Messed up," she echoed, tilting her head slightly. The simplicity of the phrase felt almost absurd. "You took everything," she said, her voice still steady. "You didn't just leave, you erased me." Daniel looked down, unable to meet her eyes for a moment. "I thought I could fix things," he admitted. "The money, it wasn't what I expected. I made a bad deal. I kept thinking I could recover it before you found out." Alina listened without interrupting. "I didn't plan for it to go that far," he continued. "But it did, and then I lost everything too." There it was. The truth stripped of excuses. He looked back up at her, his expression almost pleading now. "I've been trying to find you," he said. "I didn't know where else you'd go." Elena took a slow breath. All the questions she once had, all the confusion, the pain, the need for answers, it didn't feel the same anymore. Standing here now in this place she had built, hearing him speak. Something had changed. She wasn't the same person who had stood in that empty apartment calling his name. She wasn't the same person who had sat on the sidewalk, lost and unsure. She looked around her space briefly. Every piece held a memory. Every mark told a story. Not of what she lost, but of what she became. "You want to start again, don't you?" she said quietly. Daniel nodded, almost immediately. "Yes," he said. "We can fix this, together." Together. The word lingered. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she shook her head gently. "No," she said. The answer was simple. Final. Daniel blinked, clearly not expecting it. "No," he repeated. "I already started again," she said. There was no anger in her voice. No bitterness. Just truth. She stepped slightly to the side, giving him a clearer view of everything around her. "This is mine," she continued. "Not because it's perfect, not because it's safe, but because I built it, every part of it." Daniel's eyes moved across the space again, but this time, something else showed in his expression. Understanding. Or maybe realization. "I didn't think you could survive something like this," he said quietly. Elena gave a small, almost soft smile. "Neither did I." The silence returned, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It felt clear. Daniel shifted slightly, as if unsure what to do next. "So that's it?" he asked. Elena nodded. "That's it." There was nothing left to explain. Nothing left to fix. Because the version of her that needed him to stay, to explain, to come back. That version no longer existed. He stood there for a moment longer, as if waiting for something to change. But nothing did. Finally, he turned away. The sound of his footsteps faded slowly, echoing through the tunnel just like they had when he arrived. But this time, Elena didn't feel fear. She didn't feel uncertainty. She didn't feel like something was being taken from her. She just stood there, listening until the sound disappeared completely. Then she stepped back into her space. She lit the flame again. The soft glow returned, filling the small area with warmth. She looked around, her eyes moving over every detail. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. She sat down quietly, pulling her jacket closer around her shoulders, not out of fear, but out of comfort. For the first time in a long time, the past didn't feel like something chasing her. It felt like something behind her. And the future. For the first time, it felt like something she could shape. Not with promises. Not with trust placed in someone else. But with her own hands. Her own strength. Her own choices. And as the small flame flickered gently in the quiet of the tunnel, Elena closed her eyes for a moment, not to escape, but to feel the stillness she had earned, the kind that doesn't come from everything going right, but from learning how to stand even when everything once went wrong, the kind of peace that grows slowly in the spaces where fear used to live, where doubt used to echo, where loss once felt permanent but slowly transformed into something else entirely, something stronger. Something unbreakable, something that no longer depends on who stays or who leaves, but on who you choose to become when you realize that everything you thought defined you can disappear in a single moment. And yet somehow, the most important part of you remains, waiting quietly for you to see it, to build it, to trust it, to carry it forward into whatever comes next. Moral: sometimes the people who break you are the same ones who reveal your true strength. And when everything is taken from you, It may not be the end of your story, but the beginning of the life you were meant to build on your own. This story is created for storytelling and entertainment purposes. While it may reflect real-life struggles and emotions, the characters and events are fictional or dramatized. The message is meant to inspire strength, resilience, and self-belief during difficult times.